Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 99. For a pessimist, I'm pretty optimistic. Izuku was halfway across the city before he realized he probably should have taken the train. But he had been too out of it. All his brain had been able to provide him was, "Get out now," and his feet obeyed the command. He didn't know this side of the city very well, but he recognized the buildings around him because he had seen them this morning through the window of the train, which made sense. He had been walking due north, and the train was a straight shot through the city with UA on the far south side and Uptown on the far north. He hadn't taken note of where the stops were, but he saw the tracks, so he figured he could just follow them until he found somewhere to board. He must have been walking for at least an hour to have gotten this far, and he didn't fancy walking another hour, especially now that he had his wits about him again. Walking alone with his wits taunted him was a surefire way to end up having another public meltdown. He was going to have to cancel patrol tonight. There was no way he could face Eraser right now. Hell, he couldn't face anybody right now, much less the one person who seemed to see right through him, no matter what he did. He'd let himself get too muddled. He should never have let any amount of Deku or Izuku out when he was Ivy. He should have never let Eraser get so close. He should have never let Shinso get so close either. He should never have let anyone in. It never ended well. It was only a matter of time before All Might realized how broken he was too. Deku wouldn't just die. Today was proof of that, and All Might needed better from him. He was in too deep now, though, and all he could do was stand back and watch it all go to shit like it always did. Why did he keep deluding himself into thinking things could be different? The 15-minute train ride back happened without Izuku even noticing it. He sat in his seat and stared off into nothing until the conductor came around and told him he was at the end of the line and needed to get off. It was a good thing the end of the line was where he needed to be. He's not sure how far from home he would have found himself if left to his own devices. He hadn't been this out of it in a good long while. He didn't miss it. It wasn't safe to walk home like this, but it's not like he had a better option. He did his best to pay attention and make sure no one was following him like he always did, but the effort was half-hearted at best. It felt like he blinked, and 1 second he was a 5-minute walk from the brewery, and the next he was sitting on his couch in the dark. The sun had already set. He couldn't patrol like this, and he hoped he hadn't been sitting here so long that Eraser was tearing apart the city again looking for him. Thankfully, it was only a little after 8 o'clock, which was plenty enough of an advance notice to cancel. Ivy, canceling tonight. Something came up. He didn't try to weave some sort of excuse, which was probably for the better. Over-explaining wasn't a good way to sell a lie. It makes you look too desperate for the other person to believe it and leaves you with too many details to mess up later. He should know. Lying seemed to be the only thing he was good for. Eraserhead, everything all right? Ivy, yeah. Lies, 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 and more lies. He shoved his phone back into his bag and didn't bother waiting around for more questions. He wanted to go back to wherever he went away to before, somewhere deep in his mind, locked in stasis. But at the same time, he didn't, because that would just bring him closer to tomorrow, and tomorrow wasn't going to be any better. What the hell was he supposed to do? He couldn't drop out. He couldn't tell Shinso the truth, and there's no way in hell that Shinso was going to forgive him. There was no way anyone in class was going to want to be around him. No one was going to trust him to have their back, much less be their friend. And they shouldn't. They shouldn't trust him. He's a liar. He'll lie to all of them. He wished he had gotten the chance to pretend. He didn't deserve it, but it would have been nice. He laid down on the couch and stared up into the darkness above him and let the world fall away. Sleep claimed him at some point, but he didn't remember much of anything after he let himself blank out again. He had no clue how much sleep he had gotten, but he felt as tired as ever. He was lucky his phone had enough charge to set off his alarm because he hadn't plugged it in. Sun was shining through the small windows again. It was still early, and he didn't have to get ready since he never changed to begin with. So he just tracked the progress of the sunbeams, slowly receding closer and closer to the window as the sun continued its ascent. He'd have to get up eventually, but not yet. His body felt too heavy to move. The floaty, faraway weightlessness of yesterday had left him, and now he was firmly rooted back into reality, which is a place he very much did not want to be. When his alarm went off again, informing him that it was time to go, he took a deep breath and reminded himself of what he had decided yesterday. This was irreparable, but it wasn't the end of the world. It was going to suck, and he wasn't going to have any friends, but that wasn't anything he wasn't used to. Deep breath in, deep breath out. He could do this. He picked up his bag from where he had dropped it next to the couch and headed for the door, which he hadn't even shut last night. He was lucky no one had followed him home. He shut and locked the office door behind himself and headed for the train. He could do this. Hitoshi didn't sleep a wink last night, and as his alarm screamed at him to get up, he wanted nothing more than to throw it out the window. His anger ebbed and flowed in the last 20-some-odd hours, going from white-hot fury to a soft, bitter acceptance. Back and forth, all night long. His mom had asked him again and again what had happened, but he couldn't even begin to explain. Thankfully, she was already gone for work, and he wouldn't have to deal with her prodding until he came home tonight. Kami. He had screwed everything up for both himself and Midoriya. Why did he have to bring all of that up in front of the whole class? Why couldn't he have just waited? Now everyone was in on their drama, and they were going to pick sides, and he knew for damn sure that no one was going to pick the villain quirked kid's side over the perfect heroic quirked bastard that Midoriya apparently was. This was such a nightmare. He really hoped things could go differently this time. When he got on the train, he purposefully avoided the car that had a familiar head of spiky blonde hair, and was glad to find that the second option didn't have a head of curly green hair occupying it either. Shinso didn't know what that blonde kid had against Midoriya. He was too caught up in his own anger to really pay attention. But apparently, Greenie was good at making enemies. Though Hitoshi would hazard a guess that it probably wasn't too difficult to make enemies with that blonde kid. He seemed like an a-hole, and Kami, he was so loud. He kept his headphones in and his head down as he walked onto campus. Thankfully, that was almost enough for everyone to leave him alone. Almost. He stopped about a foot short of running into someone standing directly in his path. Looking up to see his teacher, he immediately stood up straight and pulled his headphones out of his ears. You were walking like you wanted someone to attack you. Your situational awareness is deplorable, he stated bluntly. Hitoshi did not know how to respond to that, but he felt a blush rise on his cheeks. One headphone, and keep your head up, he instructed. Yes, sir, Hitoshi replied awkwardly. Aizawa seemed to notice his discomfort because he softened his stance and backpedaled a bit. You're not in trouble. It's just better to break bad habits now. Yes, yeah, got it, he fumbled out inelegantly. I wanted to speak with you before class. Do I need to be involved with whatever is going on with you and Midoriya? No, If I don't need to know, you do not need to tell me. Aizawa saved him from his fumbling. If it's not my business, it's not my business. Work it out on your own, but if it affects your education, then it becomes my problem as well. Got it? Hitoshi wasn't sure if that was Aizawa's way of saying he was there for help should he need it, or if that was his way of saying, don't make this my problem or you'll regret it, but he nodded in agreement regardless. Aizawa nodded back to him and dismissed himself with a quick, see you in class, before walking away without another word. Hitoshi couldn't say that he was well versed in how a normal social interaction was supposed to go, but he assumed it couldn't be like that because that was weird, right? Aizawa was difficult to read, he decided. He's sure he'd get the hang of it one day, but today was not that day. With his head held high enough to see his surroundings, but not high enough to look anyone in the eyes, unless they were particularly vertically challenged, he walked the rest of the way to the classroom without his headphones stuck in his ears. Katsuki was almost to the classroom with his stupid freaking essay that his stupid freaking teacher made him write because of stupid freaking Deku made a damn fool of him in front of the entire class. He knew that bastard was always looking down on him, hiding that he had some sort of super quirk just so that he could make him look like an idiot when he wasn't the only one from their garbage middle school to get into UA. Was that the end goal? What was his problem? Why'd he go through all that trouble just to make Katsuki look like a dumbass? His anger was simmering hotter and hotter the more he thought about it, and when Hobo-sensei pulled him aside before he got to the classroom, he was just about ready to blow. Bakugo, I'd like a word with you. Follow me, he said without waiting for Katsuki to reply before turning on his heel and walking away. He held his tongue and followed the ragged-looking man to what he could only assume was his office. I should hope you have that essay done, he stated as he took a seat at his desk. Katsuki handed over the papers without a word. Good. I will have you rewrite this if it's not up to my standards. You'll get it back by the end of the day. Take a seat, he instructed. He dropped his bag onto the floor with a loud thump and did as he was told. If I hear you speaking to Midoriya or anyone else like that, your expulsion will be immediate. This is not a joke. The way you acted was shameful. I don't know if your old school let you get away with that or what, but that is not going to slide here. If I had my way, you would already be gone. There is no place in heroics for someone with an attitude like yours. But you have the chance to change that. Your place here is not a right, it is a privilege, one that can and will be taken away if you step another toe out of line. Am I understood? He asked, looking down at Katsuki from his place behind the desk. Was he trying to intimidate him? The bastard was making him angry on purpose just so he could have a reason to kick him out, but Katsuki wasn't stupid. He wasn't going to fall for that. He grunted in the affirmative and gave him a nod, not once breaking the intense eye contact that the man was no doubt using to try and make him avert his eyes like a coward. He kept staring back until he was dismissed, at which point he scooped up his bag and left without a word, closing the door behind himself loud enough to be annoying, but not loud enough to get called out for slamming the door. What a bastard. When Bakugo left, Shota took a deep breath and scrubbed his thumb and forefinger over his eyes. This was going to be a long 3 years. Izuku sat in his hiding spot for a couple of minutes after the warning bell rang before he started making his way toward the classroom. He tried not to let it get to him that he was resorting to old techniques to avoid his classmates. He tried to tell himself to just accept how things were and not dwell on the fact that, even with a quirk, he was still undesirable. But his efforts were only mildly successful. He slipped into class and into his spot between Shinso and Bakugo without a word. He had noticed both Ida and Uraraka had sat up straighter and looked at the clock like they were checking to see if they had enough time to talk to him. But by his own design, they didn't. So they both settled back into their chairs. Why did they want to talk to him? Was it about the entrance exam? He couldn't think of anything else that would tie the three of them together. He wasn't going to be able to avoid them forever, so he had a feeling he would figure out what they wanted sooner rather than later, and hopefully they would leave him alone after that. Eraser walked in just as the bell tolled. I hope you've all gone through your syllabi, because I will only be explaining this once, he announced in lieu of any sort of greeting, just like he did when they met up for patrol. The familiarity was comforting, but he snapped himself out of that quickly. He wasn't Ivy, he didn't know Eraser, and his usual idiosyncrasies were unpleasant and off-putting, not reassuring. Every day, students meet for homeroom in the morning for 15 minutes. This is where all announcements will be made. It is not an excuse to be 15 minutes late to class. Even if we don't have anything to go over, you are expected to be present. After that, you will have your homeroom curriculum. For all of you, that will be law and ethics with me. Then we will rotate to the next class, which for you will be English, so on and so forth. You will be dismissed for a 45-minute lunch at 12:10, and afterward, you will return here before heroics unless I tell you otherwise, he stated flatly. Any questions? As was to be expected, no one raised their hands. After his showing yesterday and his general don't screw with me demeanor, he wasn't exactly the most approachable person, and the explanation was pretty straightforward anyway. Good. I will be here should that change, he stated after a moment of silence. After that, he stepped away from the podium, went behind the desk, pulled out that gaudy yellow sleeping bag, stepped into it, and collapsed on the ground in the corner. If Izuku weren't using 97% of his brain power to both have and fight off a crisis, he would have laughed. Because to the remaining 3% of him that knew Eraser, that was so incredibly on brand. He was more cat than man on a good day, and tired 24/7 was kind of his MO. The rest of the class wasn't as unfazed as him. From the quick glances he stole, he could see everyone's lips pursed into a straight line in an attempt to keep from laughing at their sensei, and that made the remaining 3% of Izuku's mental bandwidth want to laugh even more. He had seen the way Mike and Midnight poked and prodded at him relentlessly. The man was used to being laughed at by this point, but everyone was too scared to do anything but remain silent. The quiet kept up for a solid 3 minutes before soft whispers started to spread through the room. Whether they actually thought Eraser was asleep, or they were more disturbed by the awkward silence than the thought of consequences, Izuku wasn't sure. Even once the whole class was gently murmuring back and forth, Shinso, Bakugo, and him all kept mum. Everyone surrounding them had joined in conversations with someone else, and they certainly weren't going to talk amongst themselves. As much as Izuku didn't want to let himself be calmed by Eraser's presence, he was. He knew he had more reason to be afraid of him than anyone in the class, but he couldn't help it. Eraser was the only person he could reliably predict in this room. He wasn't any different here than he was on patrol, and that felt right. It felt safe. Not safe enough for him to let his guard down. No, not by a long shot, but safe enough to know that he wasn't alone. Not completely, at least. And that was a dangerous feeling. Eraser's class was as dry as Izuku had expected it to be, but the information they covered was interesting. It was essentially just an overview of what they would be covering throughout the semester, so they didn't get too in-depth about anything. But each topic he brought up gave Izuku plenty of ideas to further the debate. He was going to have to be careful about that, too. Eraser and him had gone into pretty deep conversations about law and ethics throughout his tenure as Ivy, and if he regurgitated any of his opinions verbatim, that was going to be a problem. First period passed by in the blink of an eye, and before he knew it, Eraser was walking out of the classroom, moving on to his next batch of students. Izuku tried not to let his anxiety get the better of him as he left. Eraser was not safe. Not here, and he needed to get that through his thick skull. Good morning, little listeners! Mike burst through the door, speaking at a volume that no functional member of society should use before 12 o'clock noon at the very earliest. Izuku, among several other classmates, flinched at the sudden noise, and he wondered how the hell Eraser put up with that amount of enthusiasm for so long. It made him achingly fond to imagine Eraser ignoring Mike's outbursts on a daily basis, though he knew there was no way they were this loud all the time. "Who's ready to learn some English?" he asked as he settled his paper on the podium. Moi! One of the students in the front row was the only one to answer in neither of the languages that one would expect from a room of Japanese students learning English. "Oh là là, tu parles français?" "Ah, oui, je viens de France. Personne ici ne parle français. C'est tellement excitant." Whoa, listener, pump the brakes. I only took a year of French as an elective. Je parle ne plus de français. But we're here to learn English anyhow. Knowing French might help you out, though. It's a lot more similar to English than Japanese is. The kid looked a little put out by whatever Mike had just said, but he nodded in agreement. "That was fun, though. I bet Eraser didn't do any get-to-know-you stuff. He's such a stick in the mud. Does anyone else know another language besides English? Because I know you all know the foundations from middle school," Mike asked the class. The kid sitting to Izuku's right said he spoke Spanish, but other than that, no one had anything to add. "Radical! Knowing languages is super helpful in heroics. I speak Japanese and English fluently, and I also know JSL," he said as he signed at the same time. "I dabbled in the Romance languages a bit, but I don't know much. Maybe you two could help me brush up," he said brightly. Izuku felt safe here, too. Not safe enough to speak up and join in the class's free-form get-to-know-you session, but safe enough to breathe evenly and not tense each time one of his classmates moved too quickly. Maybe UA could be different. Not different in the way Izuku was hoping it would be, but different enough. He trusted at least two of his teachers to not throw him to the wolves at their earliest convenience, which was more than he could say for Aldera. Maybe he wouldn't be liked, but he at least wouldn't have to be so afraid. And that was nice. No one had been bold enough to stand up and talk to someone not in their immediate vicinity in the small breaks between classes, but Izuku knew it was only a matter of time before someone started to try and talk to him. He'd been listening in on the conversations around him, and he'd caught a few names, but no one had tried to talk to him yet. That changed when the lunch bell rang. Ida and Uraraka made a beeline for him, and he did his best to not be visibly tense. Kami, what did they want? Was Ida going to chew him out for causing a scene yesterday? "Midoriya!" Ida greeted him with a small bow. "I wanted to extend my apologies to you." "What?" "I misjudged you. I had thought you weren't taking this academy seriously, but you had looked into the exam beyond the surface and acted like a true hero. My score would not have been nearly as high as it was if not for you spurring me into action," he declared dramatically. "No, I didn't. That was stupid. I didn't. UA wouldn't have let anyone get hurt. I wasn't trying to get points for." "That's even more admirable." Ida cut him off. "Goodness, for its own sake, is more impressive than intuiting a secret point system," he insisted. "Oh, Kami, what the hell was going on?" "I think what Ida is trying to say is thank you," Uraraka butted in. "Do you want to sit with us at lunch?" she asked brightly. Of all the awful things Izuku had expected to happen today, small talk wasn't one of them. Sure," he agreed nervously. Either they were messing with him, in which case he needed to do his best to act normal and not give them ammunition to throw at him later, or they wanted to thank him for helping them get more points on the entrance exam, in which case he also needed to do his best to act normal, because this might be a second chance at making a friend. Izuku knew his first impressions could be misconstrued. Maybe they thought about that too and were giving him the benefit of the doubt. He was screaming at himself internally that letting people get close, even to a fake version of himself, was only going to end poorly. But he must be stupid or a masochist, because he followed dutifully behind them as they made their way to the cafeteria. So far, Hitoshi had been spending the day in silence, doing his best to not burn holes into the back of Midoriya's head. The phrase, out of sight, out of mind, had merit, and Midoriya sitting right in front of him was proof of the opposite. He was very much in Hitoshi's sight, and thusly very much in his mind. It was a relief when the lunch bell finally rang, and he was able to remove the bushy head of green hair from his line of sight. He got his lunch quickly and made his way to an empty table out of habit, but he didn't remain alone for long. There is darkness within you. I feel a kinship. May we sit with you? The short boy with a bird head from his class asked after he walked up to the table Hitoshi was sitting at. What? We? Was all Hitoshi managed to choke out. Because honestly, what the hell was going on? I'm here too! An angry shadow emerged from the boy's chest to chastise him. Dark Shadow, calm yourself. There's no way for him to have known. The boy shot back to the creature before looking up to Hitoshi again. This is Dark Shadow, my quirk, and an extension of me, though they have a mind of their own. I am Tokoyami. He introduced himself and his, companion. Shinso, he replied succinctly. May we sit? Tokoyami asked again. Oh, yeah, sure. Go for it. He agreed quickly, forgetting what the boy had even asked him to begin with. He took his place across from Hitoshi, and the two of them sat in silence until a group of their classmates came over as well. Is anyone sitting here? A blonde kid asked, gesturing to the spot next to Hitoshi. He had a mouthful of food and used that as an excuse to not answer him verbally, shaking his head instead to let him know that no one was sitting there. He didn't know why the boy would want to sit there. There were plenty of open seats in other places. Guys, over here! He gestured to 3 more of his classmates to join them. Hitoshi's immediate response to that was, oh gosh, please no, but he squashed that down and reminded himself that he was supposed to be making friends, even if he hadn't still expected that to be a possibility after yesterday, when he'd gotten that gravity girl to use her quirk for him on ball throw. He hadn't explicitly given away his quirk, but he hadn't hidden it either, and that wasn't even to mention the whole situation with Midoriya. The boy who said he spoke Spanish, a pink girl, and a boy with spiky red hair joined the table, and Hitoshi did his best to act regular about it. I didn't get your guys' names, the pink girl said as she took her seat. I'm Mina. He glanced at Tokoyami, who also glanced toward him, like neither of them knew how the hell they were supposed to approach the situation. He supposed that with a quirk and demeanor like that, Tokoyami probably wasn't too popular in middle school either. So he took the lead. Shinso, he introduced himself. I am Tokoyami, and this is Dark Shadow. Tokoyami introduced the two of them. Dark Shadow emerged as a tiny little thing, waving timidly before disappearing. Maybe Dark Shadow was a little shy as well. That was kind of cute. I'm Kirishima, the guy with red spiky hair said enthusiastically. I'm Sero, the boy with black hair said casually. And I'm Kaminari, the boy who had first come over to scope out their table concluded. He exchanged another glance with Tokoyami that said that neither of them had any idea where to take the conversation from here. Thankfully, the 4 who had just joined them seemed to have more than enough to say to fill the silence. They chattered on and on without pause, seamlessly including Tokoyami and himself in their conversation in a way that didn't seem invasive or performative. The social grace the 4 of them so casually displayed was something Hitoshi could never dream of. He might be able to fake it one day, but it would never be as natural as they were. Hey, that kid from our class is sitting alone. Kirishima interrupted their banter about 20 minutes later to point out. Oh, Bakugo? Mina asked to clarify when everyone turned their heads to see who he'd been talking about. That blonde kid. Yeah, that didn't surprise Hitoshi in the slightest. That guy was obnoxious. Yeah, we should go sit by him, Kirishima insisted. Everyone else looked at each other, seeming a bit unsure about that, but eventually the four that had come over to sit with him and Tokoyami decided to finish the latter half of lunch with him. Martyrs, the lot of them, Hitoshi decided in the privacy of his own thoughts. With a kind farewell, they migrated over to the angry Pomeranian, leaving Hitoshi alone with Tokoyami again. They have heroic spirit, Tokoyami commented after they left. Hitoshi was sure that he meant it as a compliment toward them and not an insult toward Bakugo, but he snorted out a laugh regardless before agreeing. It was nice to have someone to lead the chattering, but now that they were gone, Hitoshi realized how loud they had been, and the quiet was nice too. For the rest of the lunch period, they occasionally made attempts at small talk, but it was painful at best. Tokoyami was nice, but they were both too awkward to be left to their own devices. They walked with each other back to the classroom, and, if nothing else, his presence was a good distraction from who he was about to have to sit behind again. He only had to restrain himself from glaring at Midoriya for a minute before, for the second time today, a tall, loud, blonde teacher burst into the room shouting, "I am here, coming through the door like a hero!" All Might announced his entrance dramatically. Hitoshi had to fight off a groan as the rest of the class oohed and awed. This was going to be a long day. End of chapter. A quick translation note. The conversation in French went as follows. Me. Oh, do you speak French? Yeah, I'm from France. No one here speaks French. This is so exciting. I speak a little French. End of translation.